Greetings and salutations, everyone. Well, the Gilded Age is wrapping up with our look at politics in it. This is really the heart of what the Gilded Age was about. Twain said that this was a time that was gilded. The term gilded means you take some junk metal, you cover it with gold so that it looks very special, but all you have to do is scratch it a little bit to see it's not gold, it's not perfect and wonderful, it's just some cheap metal. And the political situation here is really indicative of that. So the best icon of this situation, of this time, was this man, William Boss Tweed. This guy started out as a civil servant who eventually rose to power in New York and became the political system itself through favors and corruption and stealing and backward deals. He became the boss of New York, legally in every way he could. And this was outlandish, and it was corrupt, and it was in your face corrupt, and you knew it was bad and going on. And it wasn't until Tweed was finally caught red-handed of embezzling money that he finally went down. He was infamous for taking construction jobs and giving them to friends, or like, yes, we're building a brand new hospital, it'll cost $50 million, when in fact it would cost $500,000. Then he would pocket the difference. It wasn't just at the city level too. The Credit Mobilier incident was a national impact when a group of legislators had taken money that was supposed to go to railroad construction. It all looked like the money was going to build the railroads, but the railroads were never actually built. There were some pictures that were taken. Yes, these are the new rail lines, these are the new trains, but no, the money just poof, disappeared. Politically speaking, we see that things were pretty divided. Now, following the Civil War, we saw a lot of divisive diversion as well. The president President Lincoln being Republican, we see that every Republican candidate from 1868 to 1900 had fought in the Union Army or had some direct connection to it. They referenced the military every time they did anything. Democrats dominated the Southern votes, the Catholic votes, the minority votes. African Americans were voting heavily with the Republican Party at and through this time. A lot of these presidents didn't do too much to steer too much. But, you know, democracy was still going on. Our Gilded Age presidents, we start with Hayes, who said that treatment of African Americans was terrible and it was horrible and it should not be going on, but he didn't actually do anything different about it. James Garfield was shot 4 months after he was sworn in. Chester Arthur created a system of civil service tests that you had to take in order to get different civil service jobs. Cleveland was really a good president. He worked on the idea of honesty and efficiency, and he didn't care what your party was. He cared that you did what you had to do. And Harrison was just kind of in office. I really wish there was something more grand we could say about him, but there really isn't. The big thing that we get as far as Reformation legislation that happens was the merit-based system that was set up during this time. If you wanted a job, it was because you were good at that job. It's not because of who you know or how much you might donate to a certain political group or entity. Congress established the Interstate Commerce Commission, which was easier to regulate money and make sure that funds were going where they were supposed to go. And the Sherman Antitrust Act made giant monopolies and trusts illegal. That was the plan. Its actual application was a little more difficult to do. At the state level, some of these states worked with what they saw and others didn't. We did see a brief success of some third-party Labor Party groups, but by and large, they were nothing too grand. There were three unique reformers that came into being at this time. Henry George created this work, Progress and Poverty, and in it he said that there is too many poor people and too few wealthy people, and said that there needs to be a property tax. The more physical land you own, the more you are taxed, and eventually this would become a law. Bellamy wrote this novel called Looking Backward. The idea of it, and he wrote this in 1888, is 100 years from now, what is society going to look like? And he envisioned a society where there's a couple of people who ride in a car, or it's a carriage is what he's describing, in total and complete luxury, while everyone else is just kind of there. They are struggling to get by. And finally, we have Henry Lloyd, who wrote The Wealth Against Commonwealth. And in it, he takes on Standard Oil, this monopoly. And he says that this is not survival of the fittest. This is not laissez-faire. You have this entity that has grown so rich, so powerful, they can do whatever they want. They're more powerful than kings. Why would a democracy have something like this? It's not a surprise that when things are rough, and whether it was the Depression or the droughts that happened in the late 19th century, we see that extremism movements are more likely to pop up. In the late 19th century, we see rise in socialist movements, in Marxist movements, and these became real political entities, real political organizations. The idea of communism is that those without will rise up and violently take over the means of production. And the ideas of socialism is that the state is going to work for the betterment of people. The way I'd like to describe socialism and communism is think of socialism as communist light. It's like a good diet soda. It's kind of like it, but it's not as crazy as it. Socialism doesn't have that big, and then they all died part of the story. Labor was brought into real study during this time. Not a lot changes, not a lot happens, but the idea that maybe labor should change is definitely something that's being addressed right now. One of the big ones was the 10-hour workday. And oh my goodness, working 10 hours. No, they were cutting it back to 10 hours and a 60-hour work week. And the thing about this, the thing about these things was that was cut from almost 80. So yeah, 60-hour weeks, 10-hour days, that's a lot of hours. But when you consider what it's a cutback from, it's great. Unfortunately, it did not stand for long. The 6-day work week and 10-hour workday was considered unconstitutional because it infringed on a person's individual freedom. Lochner argued that I should have the ability to work as hard as I want, as many hours as I want, and the state of New York agreed with that. Labor unions and industrial laborers start appearing at this time. The idea that if we're all working in a factory and we're all in this together, then we can all agree on the basic things we need. That might mean new tools, this might mean better pay, this might be safer hours. And it was really a great birth movement. And the labor unions that are going to be created are going to help shape a lot of foundational ideas that are going to come out of the Second Industrial Revolution. One of these big labor organizations was the Knights of Labor, and they supported the idea that there should be no direct connection with your working conditions. Your politics and your working conditions should be two separate things. They rejected the idea that if you started working in a factory, that you were always going to work in a factory. They believed that over time there should be some improvement to the people. The wage system that kept people consistently poor, they didn't like that. They also didn't like the idea of, hey, let's all go on strike, because they wanted to see change longer lasting. Typically, the Knights of Labor was more industrial based instead of craft based. So if you worked in a factory, you'd be more likely to be doing this. If you're an artisan, you probably would not join the Knights of Labor. They welcomed anyone who could join, and their big goal was the 8-hour work day. Things get violent with the McCormick plant. When the McCormick Harvesting Machine Company goes on strike, one of the strikers is killed, and the police break up a meeting that was happening the next day when people are, hey, this isn't right, this isn't fair. And shortly thereafter, someone throws a bomb at the Haymarket riot. And it is pandemonium, it is bedlam. There's a group of people who are executed. And when it's all said and done, the union is looked at as the bad guys in this. Now, we don't know who threw the bomb. We just know that things escalated very bad and some people died. There's another video in this lecture unit that talks about August Spies and the Haymarket riot. I would highly encourage you to go in and watch this. Finally, we've got the American Federation of Labor. The AFL said that if you were going to work and you're going to work a wage earning job, then you need to come with something out of it. They said that if you're going to work for a wage, that's okay, but you need to have something that you get out of it, a skill, a trade, something. And for the AFL, the union was more of a social club and a tool. Yes, they wanted to strike, and they knew that it was a great way to get a lot of attention. And they also knew that they could appeal to people across a lot of different ways, whether it was by money, whether it was by, hey, you need something other than money in your life, whatever that may be, these guys were it. So, as we wrap up the Gilded Age, it's good to look back and see that this was a time there was new inventions, new controls, new corruptions, new expansions, and new ways people are being treated. It's not always good, but it is always moving forward. So, I hope you learned something new today. I'll see you next time.